You're listening to Moving Business Forward Faster, a podcast by the United Nations Global Compact.
This is an infinitely solvable problem.
Convene businesses around a large, ambitious goal.
It's the right thing for our business. It's the right thing for society.
Moving business forward faster.
Forward Faster will help us all together as a community to drive progress on the Sustainable Development Goals. It's time to move forward faster.
Welcome to the podcast Moving Business Forward Faster, your insight into how businesses are shaping a sustainable future. Today, we face a critical challenge. Over 2 billion people lack safe drinking water, with a looming 40% gap between water demand and availability by 2030. Our focus is on building water resilience in organizations. This approach isn't just about business growth. It's about reducing operational risks, enhancing reputation, and importantly, supporting the UN's human right to water and sanitation. The goal is to foster water resilience in global operations and supply chains, impacting 100 vulnerable water basins by 2030. While water is essential, it's also crucial to highlight the other sustainable development goals. Gary White and Janet Ranganathan. So maybe I'll start with you, Gary. Maybe you can tell us a little bit of what you do and your organizational goals.
Well, first, thanks for having us on the podcast. It's wonderful to be here and talk about these issues with the backdrop of COP because they are so critical. And what we focus on at Water.org and Water Equity is helping people living in low-income countries and middle-income countries get access to the water and sanitation services that they need. And we primarily do that through helping them get access to affordable finance so that they can choose the solutions that are best for them. And with that type of approach, we feel like we can use philanthropic capital and multiply it. Actually, we can multiply it about 17x in terms of generating more capital from the capital markets so people can use those funds to get these microloans and get a water connection or build a toilet or buy a water filter, whatever's best for them to solve their own local water supply crisis.
Okay, so that's at the heart of SDG 6.
Yes, exactly. 6.1 and 6.2 water
6.1
and sanitation.
and 6.2. Thank you. Janet, can you share a little bit of what we do at World Resources Institute?
Yes, so I'm Managing Director for Strategy, Learning and Results, SLR, I think Sea Level Rise, and Learning and Results. WRI is a mission-driven, research-based organization that's focused on advancing 3 interconnected goals. So people, in other words, the SDGs, nature, Convention on Biodiversity, and climate. And importantly, we see those as interconnected, so they are joined up North Star. And I should say they're not WRI's goals, they're actually the world's goals too. Yes. And of course, water cuts across all 3 of those.
Oh, very nice. So I will start with you, Gary. Water.org and Water Equity have been pivotal in improving access to water and sanitation for low-income communities, as you have said. Can you describe a little bit of your model?
So what we've discovered, having been doing this for over 30 years, is that while philanthropic capital, charity, is kind of needed to help a lot of people get access to water and sanitation, what we recognize is charity alone was never going to be enough. We're talking about a $1.7 trillion challenge to solve for the global water supply crisis. And so what we discovered was that people were actually paying for water already. So you go and visit some of the communities where we're working, and you see women walking hours each day to collect water. You see girls not in school and they're walking to collect water. Or in urban areas, people were paying cash to water vendors who sell water off the backs of these trucks. It's not necessarily even clean. And those people were paying about 15 times more per liter than if they had a water connection. So what we recognized is there was this incredible amount of coping costs that people were paying. And it kind of goes to this concept that we've learned is it's really expensive to be poor, because you have to pay these day-to-day costs. So what we said, well, what if we could get microfinance institutions to start lending to low-income people so that they could get the solutions that they needed. And what that became was water credit, and that is our model at water.org. And that is basically allowing people to get those small loans for the solutions that they want. And so that's been more than 10 years ago we were working on that. And now you fast forward and we've reached about 60 million people with access to water and sanitation through about 150 local financial partners around the world who implement this approach. And so that is 60 million people who didn't need charity to be able to do this. So when we think about how do we scale up solutions to the water and sanitation crisis, it has to pass through more smarter, kind of more innovative financial models. And that's really what we're looking at as we go into water equity as well. And we can talk more about that after I catch my breath and give Janet a chance.
Yes. Well, that has an impact on health also. Because,
absolutely. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
It has lots of impacts. Well, Janet, during your tenure, you've played a key role in transforming WRI from a US-centric organization to a global entity, right? Everyone knows at the moment WRI. So could you share some insights on how this approach addresses global sustainability challenges?
Yes, glad to. So I joined WRI about 30 years ago, and there were 63 of us. And although we were globally focused, we were all based in the US.
Okay.
Today, there's 1,800 of us, and we now have a physical presence, an office in 12 countries or regional offices across South America, Asia, Africa, and actually North America too. So actually the establishment of WRI offices, and they're very locally, they're led by local nationals, has kind of transformed our approach to change. So first of all, I would just say, all impact, I talked earlier about people, nature, and climate, actually happens in a geography. So with the country offices now, we still have the global work, but although 65% of our staff now work in the country offices, we can bring both this sort of global approach and a bottom-up approach. We call it a local and global together. WRI is focused on advancing those goals of people, nature, and climate through the 3 critical systems that will be make or break for those goals. So that's the food, linked to land, water, and forests, the energy system, and the urban system. And each of those systems, the kind of challenges that we have to deal with, whether it's finance or governance or private sector, you need to bring this multi-scale approach to it. So as the Managing Director for Strategy, one of my jobs right now is to ensure that we are focused and integrated across WRI. So it's not the countries working on some global project that we might have been lucky enough to raise funds for. Now it's how does the global work actually help our countries deliver the impact on the ground? What do they need? How do we make sure that our different countries are working on the same thing? Like to take restoration, we've got 8 of our geographies working on doing restoration. How do we make sure that they're learning from each other what works, often what doesn't, unfortunately? So it's a much more joined up, multi-dimensional organization than before. The last thing I just want to say is we never use the word headquarters in the US. It's always like, there's a global function and then there's a country function. We're kind of equal partners in that. And increasingly, we hire people to do the global work. They don't have to sit in the US to do that. They can be in WRI India or WRI Mexico or WRI Ethiopia.
Great model. Great model. Well, Gary, could you share how Waters Work partnership has evolved? How has this impacted your strategy and in co-founding Water Equity?
Yeah, partnerships are at the heart of what we do, and we are kind of at the pivot point of some of these partnerships. Obviously, the most important partners in all of this are the people in need of water and sanitation. They have the greatest stake in this work, and are bringing their own resources to the table, as well as the resources that we get from partnerships on the other end, which is our donors, our philanthropic supporters. And increasingly those have been corporate philanthropic supporters because, again, they're starting to see how important water is in their operations, in watersheds where they're operating, and kind of their social license to operate. And so they see a lot of power in helping at the watershed level, but also helping for water for human needs that we can kind of connect them with. And as we've evolved with the water credit program and saw that these financial partners around the world require much more capital to scale up, to do millions more of these microloans, we said, what if we were able to tap into social impact investing? And this was back like in 2015, 2016, where this was kind of on the rise, and get some of that capital from investors, debt and equity capital, that would provide a financial return to investors, but that also would provide social impact. So we started launching funds. We've done 4 funds now. And we've raised about $350 million in committed capital that we now then provide as debt to these financial partners around the world. And they pay that back to us with interest after they break it into millions of small loans and help people get water. So then we're able to repay the investors, and we have a targeted competitive financial return in the market. So we're able to continue to grow these funds, so we can bring philanthropy into the picture. We use that to kind of correct some of these market failures that we see, to get institutions more bankable. And then we have the investment capital that complements that. We kind of put this all together under one roof because we have water.org and water equity philanthropy multiplied to allow us to bring in the capital markets.
Okay. I'm a bit curious to understand how governments look at your work.
So we work in partnership with government. So we certainly see governments still have a key responsibility to ensure that the backbone, the infrastructure is there. Oftentimes they don't have enough capital to expand that infrastructure, which is where water equity can come in as well. But for instance, in India, we've worked very closely with the government of India, where they've had major national pushes to get everyone access to sanitation and everyone access to piped water. And what we've been able to do is work with them so that they don't have to see like all of that money has to come from the top down. What if they are able to work with water credit programs with we have, about a third of our impact actually has been in India with working with the government there. And so instead of having all that money needing to come from the top down, which would take decades possibly, what if you could leverage the capital from the bottom up? People take out these loans, they repay them, and another one gets the loan, and they repay it, and another one gets the loan. So it recycles, and people then get the solutions. And this is what's really key. They don't get the solution that we as an international organization think they should have. Like, we're not showing up and drilling wells and cutting ribbons and saying, you're welcome. We're saying, we want to give you access to the financial tools so that you can solve your own water supply problem in the way that you see as best for you and your family. And I think that's the key to, we're talking about sustainability. No one's going to take out a loan for a water connection or a toilet or anything if they don't want it, and if they're not going to maintain it. And so that's key to it as well.
Perfect. Thank you. Well, Janet, the World Resources Institute works on critical sustainability issues related to food, forests, water, climate, energy, cities. Well, you have spoken about that. So, from your perspective, what are some of the most promising solutions or initiatives that you pursue at the moment to address these challenges?
So, thinking across food, energy, and cities, the most promising solutions are always the ones that actually play to the people, nature, climate triad.
Okay.
And so one of the things
that interconnect.
Exactly. So, and the reason why it's really important to pursue those goals in a joined-up way, which is actually a profound shift for WRI, because we used to have a separate climate program, a nature program, we had a program on equity. We said, well, the root causes of those are in these 3 human systems of food, energy, and cities. So how do we deliver those needs? And as Gary said, some of those needs are not being met. 700 million without access to fresh water. There's also 700 plus who go to bed hungry every night. There's 700 million, as it happens, that don't have access to modern electricity, and another 2.7 billion that don't enjoy all of the benefits that come with the internet. But how do you join those up? So thinking about our food work, we have a restoration initiative.
Okay.
And so restoration, There's definitely a people component to that. We're working with farmers often who, they've seen their crops go down and down and down. They don't have access to water. They don't have access to income. So how do we restore that in a way that's good for the people, but also brings back some of the nature? So agroforestry is a very good example, but it's also thinking about climate too. So it's just the three together. Same with energy. We can't just go to developing countries and say, let's think about how we design your energy system to achieve climate goals. If you don't have any energy, you're going to use whatever you can get your hands on. So, energy systems are affordable, it's reliable. So 100% renewables is not reliable. So, you've got to think about that. But biofuels that require dedicated use of land, unfortunately, now compete with land for food. So there's a trade-off there. So just thinking about the trade-offs, but also the co-benefits. And the same with our cities work. We, for example, we have a project in Mexico that's increasing access to affordable mass transit. We used to just focus on mass transit as a low carbon thing, but now we think about how do we actually think about mass transit, metro systems for the underserved, because getting to a job is a way to increase economic opportunity. So that changes the way we think about who we're trying to target with this. So again, bringing this sort of integrated approach, and then also being able to go back and look at whether you've actually delivered that. Because it's easy to say, well, we've implemented this practice, so therefore that practice is a solution. Well, often it isn't. It doesn't work out the way you think. So you need to work with your partners to put that monitoring, evaluation, learning system, which is why when I was made managing director for strategy, I added the learning and results, because it isn't always it isn't always a given. And actually, some of the lessons in our failures are actually more powerful and effective to us than raising this flag of success all the time.
Oh, perfect. So, Gary, how does Water.org and Water Equity measure and communicate impact to investors and other stakeholders?
Well, the key way that we measure it is through our financial partners and the microloans that they provide, and following up on those to ensure that those loans are used and deployed appropriately for the water and sanitation improvements. And so that's the key thing, who is getting access to an improved toilet, who's getting access to water, and kind of what are the impacts on them. And so we monitor that across our partner network, and part of our agreements with them ensure that they kind of populate our data management system so that we can track that and see what's happening. Of course, when we look at water equity and the investors that are in that, which are increasingly corporations that have been investing in some of our funds, using their balance sheets to do that, they want to see that social impact for sure, and this helps them with their ESG on top of that. But then, of course, they want to see, are we able to deliver the financial returns that we project that we will? And so that's another measure that we look at. So, of course, even with impact first investing, there still is a need to, if you want to scale the capital in this system to the level of the problem, like I said, $1.7 trillion, you're not going to be able to do that unless you can provide competitive financial returns ultimately. But what's important about our model and how we exist as Water.org and Water Equity is making sure that that is done in a way that it also benefits the poor, that the loans aren't onerous, and working with local financial institutions to make sure that they're fair and that they are basically appropriate to the local market. So it's a fine line to walk sometimes, but what we see is the value that's created for a woman when she gets water for the first time and isn't walking to collect water, the value that's created for her and her family, short-term and long-term. These loans just get taken up at an incredible rate because women see, just a quick story of a woman in the Philippines. Her name was Lina Riza. I met there. She was paying a water vendor $2 a day for water from one of these trucks, $60 a month. And she took out a water credit loan from one of our local partners, and her loan payments were $5 a month for 2 years. And her water bill was now down to $5 a month. So you can see the value that was created for her literally overnight was an extra $50 in her family budget each month to do that. And that's why 90% of the borrowers in these programs are women, and they repay the loans at a 98% rate. And so you can see how much value that creates for them, and why we can figure out a system that really creates the financial plumbing that connects that woman, Lina Riza, with someone who's an investor on the other side. And that financial plumbing is what makes it all work.
Oh, perfect.
Susan, do you mind if I just pick up on the impact thing and how do we evaluate? So one of our initiatives around protecting forests, because not only are they a harbour of biodiversity and carbon, but importantly they're water regulatory systems. Yeah, you lose the Amazon, you lose the water, you lose the whole of the agriculture in South America. But anyway, we have something called Global Forest Watch. It uses satellite imagery, AI, partnership with many organizations, Google Earth Engine, University of Maryland. It basically monitors deforestation at 10-meter resolution every 5 days across the tropics. So someone can actually, draw a little circle on a map, and we will send them out an alert if a fire happens there or there's deforestation. So we were really excited about it, all these users that have subscribed for these deforestation alerts, GLAD alerts we call them. That's how we used to measure success. But then we said, okay, but actually using these deforestation alerts is not the impact. The impact we want is less deforestation.
Of course.
And we have Global Forest Watch. We're monitoring forests, so we have the data, so go back and look at that. So we actually were able to go back and look at areas where there was active alert systems in place and where there weren't, and looked at if there was any discernible difference on deforestation. And guess what? In Central Africa, we're very excited to learn, actually, there was 18% reduction in deforestation in those areas. And 18% is large. In Central Africa, it's like 50 million hectares. But when we looked in South America, where we were also running this, no impact.
No impact.
We're like, okay, well, why is that? And also what we learned about the Africa one is that the alerts are more effective when there was a regulatory instrument in place. So if it was in a forest concession where you shouldn't be doing this, or it's a protected area and it's actually be actively enforced, they were much more effective than not as a case. The interesting in South America is there was already lots of other systems that were in place. Okay. So, then maybe we don't need to put as many resources into South America because we don't need to compete. But it then forces us to look at how do we become more effective at targeting and delivering this.
You have co-founded the Greenhouse Gas Protocol initiative, which has become a global standard for corporate gas accounting and reporting. How do you see the role of corporations evolving in the fight against climate change?
Great, thanks for the question. I'll just say co-founded with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Let's give them credit here. They were great. They've been a great partner over the years. So how has it evolved? So when we came out with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, good practice then was companies would do what's called a Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions. Scope 1, they're direct emissions from within their fence line, the stacks and the cars or whatever that they have. Scope 2 being their purchased electricity. And Scope 3 being all other indirect emissions in their product use phase or their value chain. So Scope 1 and Scope 2 was the standard practice. So it's evolved now. It's not good practice to just be doing Scope 1 and Scope 2. You have to also be doing all of your other indirects. And the thing is that the majority of most companies' emissions are in the Scope 3. If you take the oil and gas sector, which they're talking about here, they want to just do Scope 1 and 2. Well, that's about 10% of their emissions.
Yep.
We missed out on the fact that when you burn these things, they actually produce a lot of emissions.
It's not enough.
It's also true of agriculture. If you're a food company, most of your emissions in your supply chain. So that's changed. The second thing is about target setting. Companies used to they do the inventory, what gets measured. You say, okay, how do you manage that? We set a target. It used to be these kind of incremental target, like a 10% improvement. And you know what? We used loads of offsets to get there. In fact, WRI did that. We set our own inventory and we used lots of offsets. That's not good practice anymore. Now you need to set a science-based target that's on track to deliver 1.5 degrees. It's not enough to be good. You have to be good enough for where we are. And then the second thing is offsetting. I'm sorry, but we're 25 years on now. Everyone has to be on that science-based target. There's no sort of room for that. So you need to be on a science-based target, no offsets. But of course, we need funding for kind of projects like that Gary works on in developing countries. So the way I envision that happening is everyone has to be on a science-based trajectory. All companies, they may actually use credits to neutralize their emissions, the residual emissions, on the way to net zero. So this is what we call counterbalancing. So that's a way to create funding and allow companies to say, well, we're at net zero earlier, but we're not. That's very different to offsets. This is like just the residual emissions on the way to net zero. Okay. The next thing I would just say is, companies used to typically lobby against regulations, sort of instinctively regulations cost money. But now, leadership companies actually see the importance of actually policymakers doing their job, putting some, level playing thing in here and helping to sort of bring the masses along. So leadership companies, I would expect to be working with organizations like Ceres. They've got this called BICEPS, which is Business for Innovative Climate Energy Policy, where they convene, your large brand names, McDonald's, IKEA, whatever, to be asking governments in the countries where they operate to please put this policy in place to create this level playing field. So I just sort of say, if you're not part of the solution and you're a business, you're part of the problem. So get with it. And you know what? Scope 3 isn't a problem. Most companies, when they do
it's challenging, but it's not a problem.
That's where your buried treasure is. That's where the opportunities are. I mean, think about GE and eco-imagination. It's like, where's your next innovation or innovations that will support where the world's inevitably going to have to go?
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you. Gary, last question. You have co-authored The Worth of Water with your co-founder, Matt Damon. What are the core messages of the book that businesses can apply to their water strategies?
That is a good question too, because when you write a book like that, like Matt and I did, you want to make it inclusive and be able to appeal to a lot of audiences. I think the main message that crosses all audiences is that this is an infinitely solvable problem, not some future solution, not some magic bullet solution. But when you think about it, the majority of the planet does have access to safe water and sanitation, and there's a reason for that. We value it, we invest money in it, and we maintain it. Not as well today as we have in the past in terms of the maintenance, but that's a whole different podcast, I think. But the concept is it is doable, especially if we see initiatives like where the financing is coming from the bottom up. If people living in poverty are willing to meet us halfway, in terms of creating some of these solutions, it's really incumbent upon us to kind of reach out the other halfway to make this happen, to make safe water a reality for everyone. So that certainly is the message of the book for broad audiences. When we look at corporates and business in the context of the messages that are there, it's what we are already starting to see, and that is corporates looking at whole watersheds, looking at their whole value chain in terms of their water footprint and what's happening with water resilience around the world. And so we've been a key partner with the Water Resilience Coalition, which has a number of large corporations committing to those watershed protections and looking at their water footprint there, and committing to reach 300 million people with access to improved water and sanitation. So they are responding to that through the messages in the book, but also the messages that they get from the marketplace, in terms of ESG and what investors require or demand, and what their employees demand, especially younger employees see their partnerships with us as a very positive thing. Things that we've done with Starbucks, that we've done with Stella Artois, Caterpillar, IKEA, and others who see this as critical to what we are as people, but critical to what they see as their business. And when those start to come together and mutually reinforce, we have the potential to solve this crisis and to solve it sustainably.
So you are confident that they are on the right direction?
I definitely think we're in the right direction. The magnitude, there's direction and there's magnitude. I'm an engineer, right?
Go a bit faster.
Yes,
and more of them.
We're in the right direction. We need a little bit more magnitude, but I'm optimistic about that.
Okay. Well, Janet, you have worked with businesses your whole life, I would say. So how do you drive scalable impact in business, which is quite the same question?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And anyone who's out there working partnership with business, ask yourself, because they are a very potent force for good, particularly where there hasn't been as much, what do I call it, the word, standing up by governments in some cases. But you have to ask yourself, how do you get to, working one business by one business at a time isn't going to get us to the level of scale that we need. So what's your scalable strategy for working for business? So I've already alluded to one in an earlier answer, which is, I subscribe to this view that, there's a sort of normal distribution of curves on whatever the performance issue, whether it's water or climate. I think this is a high strategy, moving with this sort of front leaders, okay, get them ahead, show them that we can do this, and then at some point they bang up against this policy barrier where it no longer pays them to do the right thing. Now they're a powerful ally to work with us to get the regulations to make sure that they're out of the way and it's supporting them. So that then policies then allow us to move the whole pack to, move companies to move governments to move the whole pack of businesses. That's one model which I talked about with the biceps example. Another example is to sort of convene businesses around a large, ambitious goal. So we have something called the Cool Food Initiative, and it works with food services companies, so like Hilton Hotel or Max Burger or universities, cities, to actually reduce their Scope 3 emissions, when we talked about Scope 3 earlier, from food purchases, so that you sell food that's lower carbon, so more plant-based. We're not trying to make everyone vegetarian, but more plant-based. And so they've committed to a 25% reduction in their Scope 3 emissions from serving up more plant-based food. So and they've actually set, the group of companies, Cool Food companies, have set a collective target for that.
Okay.
Third example would be the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, which is a standard now. We have all companies using it, so think scale.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for listening to Moving Business Forward Faster, a podcast by the United Nations Global Compact. To learn more about Forward Faster, visit forwardfaster.unglobalcompact.org.